Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Honorable members, you will forgive me for my inability at this time of the day to match the energy or enthusiasm of the Honorable Member for Upper Salum. I'm sure my Badibunka sons will rejoice at hearing that. Honorable Speaker, I move that this August Assembly, pursuant to Section 34, subsection 5, paragraph A1 of the 1997 Constitution of the Gambia, extend for a period of 45 days, effective 18th May 2020, the resolution of the National Assembly, which was passed on 3rd April 2020, for the extension of the state of public emergency in the whole of the Gambia, declared by His Excellency President Adama Barrow on 26 March 2020, pursuant to Section 34, subsection 1A of the 1997 Constitution. I also move that this August Assembly affirm by resolution the following regulations pursuant to Section 5 of the Emergency Powers Act. The restrictions on open markets and shopping areas Emergency Powers Regulation 2020 as amended. The Essential Commodities Emergency Powers Regulation 2020 as amended. The restrictions on public transportation Emergency Powers Regulations 2020 as amended. The closure and restriction on non-essential public places Emergency Powers Regulation 2020, and the closure of educational institutions and places of worship Emergency Powers Regulation 2020. Madam Speaker, Section 35(5)(a)(1) of the Constitution provides 5(a)(1) of the Constitution provides a resolution of the National Assembly passed for the purpose of this section shall remain in force for 90 days or such shorter period as may be specified therein, provided that any such resolution may be extended from time to time by a further resolution, supported in the case of a first extension by the votes of not less than 3/4 of all the members of the National Assembly. But no extension shall exceed 90 days from the date of the resolution effecting the extension. Madam Speaker, you will recall that on 3rd April 2020, in response to the global threat of the coronavirus pandemic, as declared by the World Health Organization, WHO, and to which the Gambia is vulnerable, the National Assembly passed a resolution that extended the state of public emergency declared by His Excellency the President, pursuant to Section 34(1)(a) of the 1997 Constitution. At that point in time, only 2 cases of infection of the virus was reported in the Gambia, and 171 other countries had reported varying degrees of infections. As at that date, the virus had killed 20,834 people globally, according to the WHO. Madam Speaker, 3 days ago, as of 12th May 2020, the rate of infection of the coronavirus globally stood at over 4 million people, out of which almost 300,000 have died from the infection, according to the WHO. Closer to home, in Senegal, for instance, for the same period, the rate of infection stood at over 1,800 people. I'm now told it's over 2,100, with 19 deaths as at the time, and I'm now told with 23 deaths from the infection. When compared to the figures at the time of the passing of the first resolution on 3rd April 2020, Senegal had 195 infections with 1 death. Here in the Gambia, our rate of infection has also increased to 23. Unfortunately, only 1 reported death from the virus in the country. But we must not be complacent about this fact. There is no doubt that the coronavirus, otherwise known as COVID-19, continues to pose a clear and present danger to the Gambia and remains deadly. So the government needs to continue taking measures that will, among other things, break the chain of transmission in order to prevent a further spread of the virus, and concurrently alleviate the consequent hardship that all of us may face. The government is aware that the measures which may be imposed as a result of this extension will affect our lives. But like I said the last time I appeared before this August Assembly on this subject matter, this is now a matter of survival first and not about individual preferences. In this regard, you will recall that a number of emergency regulations were issued by His Excellency President Barrow to address these hardships. These include the Essential Commodities Emergency Powers Regulation, which sought to protect the public from price hikes and ensure adequate food supplies in the country during the period of the state of public emergency. Other regulations include restrictions on public transportation, restrictions on open markets, and the closure of non-essential public places. So in order to enable the government continue to provide effective leadership in this national preventive effort, the government must be given a margin of appreciation in deciding the measures it wishes to adopt, the duration, and the timing. These are key tools that should be put at the disposal of the government so that it can fully and effectively assume its leadership responsibilities to prevent a looming catastrophe in our country. Madam Speaker, the 45 days extension of the period of the state of public emergency granted by the National Assembly on 3rd April 2020 will expire on 18 May 2020. But the threat of COVID-19 still looms over us. The determination to break the chain of transmission of the virus is more needed now than ever before, in view of the recent reports from the WHO. And so we must intensify our collective national efforts towards achieving this goal. Therefore, Madam Speaker, a 45-day extension of the resolution passed by this August Assembly on 3rd April 2020, which extended the period of the state of public emergency declared by His Excellency President Barrow on 26 March 2020, will allow the government to continue to carry out its responsibilities towards the people of this country, not only to save lives, but to also balance the competing political, social, and economic interests we are confronted with in these difficult times. Madam Speaker, for these reasons, I move that this August Assembly, pursuant to Section 34, subsection 5A1 of the 1997 Constitution of the Gambia, extend for a period of 45 days, effective 18th May 2020, the resolution of the National Assembly, which was passed on 3rd April 2020, for the extension of the state of public emergency in the whole of the Gambia, declared by His Excellency President Adama Barrow on 26 March 2020. I also move that this August Assembly affirm by resolution the following regulations pursuant to Section 5 of the Emergency Powers Act. The restrictions on open markets and shopping areas Emergency Powers Regulation 2020 as amended. The Essential Commodities Emergency Powers Regulations 2020 as amended. The restrictions on public transportation Emergency Powers Regulations 2020 as amended. the closure and restriction on non-essential public places, Emergency Powers Regulations 2020, the closure of educational institutions and places of worship, Emergency Powers Regulations 2020. Madam Speaker, with your permission, I would like to add a few remarks to this motion. Madam Speaker, the 45 days that the government is requesting is the minimum that has been recommended by the government's chief health advisor, who is here with us, and I'm sure he will be delighted to be given the opportunity to further elaborate on this. And it is based on the science that is available and the prognostics that have been made about this pandemic, not on sentiments, as the Honorable Member for Woolly West widely said. Indeed, the government acknowledges that more testing needs to be done in order to help the government determine what further actions may or may not be taken. The overriding objective of this motion is to protect life, including the lives of the people who live in your constituencies. The latest figures from WHO state that nearly 250 million Africans will be infected. 250 million Africans will be infected, with almost 200,000 deaths. 200,000 deaths. We do not want our people to fall in these statistics, or as many of our people as we can avoid. As leaders, Madam Speaker, honorable members of this August Assembly, as leaders, it is our responsibility sometimes to lead public opinion and not to follow public opinion. That is what is expected of us in times like this. And it is incumbent upon us to do everything that we can, including sensitizing our own people about the dangers of this pandemic. Not just to follow their individual wishes and desires. Yes, the government admits that there is still room for improvement in the enforcement of the regulations. We will not run away from that. That's just a reality. Many other governments face similar challenges. But we also dare say that the regulations are being implemented and enforced in large part, in very large part. We can take this one after the other. Let's look at the essential commodities regulation, emergency powers regulation. Can we honestly say that the government has not protected these essential commodities from price hikes? How many times have we seen people being prosecuted? It's been reported in the newspapers. Can we honestly say that the government has not protected these commodities from being exported out of the country? How many times have we seen in the newspapers people have been prosecuted for exactly those offenses? Let's look at the restrictions, or rather the closure of educational institutions and places of worship. Can we also say that the schools and the mosques and the churches have not been closed? Can we really say that? The few comments I heard from some of the members here are protesting exactly against that, because the government is enforcing those regulations. And the protest is for the government to lift the restrictions so that these places can be opened. That is enforcement in my book. Let's look at the restrictions I think I'm missing one regulation here. But let's look at the restrictions on non-essential public places. Another example. Are we saying that the bars are still open? Or that the cinemas and video clubs are still open? Or the gyms or the nightclubs? Or the restaurants? Is that what we are saying? Of course, they are closed. That is enforcement. Yes, I can go on and on with respect to the other regulations. On public transport, we have seen reports of drivers being prosecuted, either for going beyond the limits that were imposed by the regulations or for increasing the prices that were limited by the regulations. We have seen those reports in our newspapers. So yes, the regulations are being enforced. But yes, there is still room for improvement. We have challenges, especially when it comes to the market areas. We will admit that. But enforcing the regulations with respect to the market areas will not be helped by some of the comments that have been made in this August Assembly. Because some of these regulations cannot be enforced by brute force. We need to accompany the enforcement of these regulations with sensitization for our people. We need to make our people feel that it's their responsibility to protect themselves before they can spread the virus to us. If we do not accompany these regulations with sensitization, we will continue to face challenges. So it is incumbent not just upon the government to enforce these regulations, it's incumbent upon each and every one of us, especially those of you in this August Assembly who represent your constituencies, who represent your people, to sensitize them. Otherwise, we can never, as a government, successfully implement these regulations because they cannot simply be implemented by force alone. Those days are over in this country. So help us, help this government enforce these regulations. That's my plea to you. Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Thank you, members. I beg to move.